What's up, guys? So today we are talking about LOIs and really what an LOI is. So essentially, an LOI in commercial real estate it stands for letter of intent, and it's a document that kind of outlines what the preliminary terms and the conditions of the proposed transaction between the buyer and seller would look like. It's not necessarily a legally binding contract, but it serves as a starting point for negotiations and formalizes the interest in purchasing the property. So what is the purpose of it? Purpose of the LOI is really just to establish basic terms and conditions of a potential deal before entering into a formal purchase agreement. It generally helps both parties do negotiations because, as you can imagine, in commercial, you are not dealing with necessarily one contract. You're dealing with attorneys, and attorneys have costs to them, right? So the LOI will kind of just outline those generalized terms. And at least if you know that you have a chance of working together, that's what the LOI is for, right? So you're going to say, hey, I want, seller financing. And if the seller's like, no, I'm not seller financing, then you didn't have to pay an attorney in order to draft that contract and what it would look like. So there's really not much cost in it, right? No, typically always consult with your attorney, as I recommend. I'm not an attorney, blah, 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 right? So generally the content in the LOI will include, the purchase price. That's obviously the main thing, in any contract, any LOI. You want to include the purchase price. What earnest money deposit are you putting down? You're going to type in there what financing terms you want. So like I said, if, for instance, we just submitted an LOI on a property and there was an assumable loan, so that financing term would be, hey, we will assume the existing loan, but we also want the seller to finance a portion of the difference, right? Because it was $1 million difference, and we don't have $1 million, so we would like the seller to finance a portion of that $1 million. So in this case, we asked them to finance about $500,000 owner financing, which then that's able to get recorded as a second deed of trust on the property, so that the owner is protected, right? And then we would go raise $500,000. So that's how some of the financing terms might be broken out. So generally, it would also include any due diligence period. So in commercial, you always want to do your due diligence. For instance, if you're buying land, you're going to want to do what's called a perk analysis. If you're buying a commercial property, you're going to want the T12s. You're going to want the rent roll. You're going to want to do maybe a feasibility study, or even is there anything that had to be done that wasn't done? So usually you do a feasibility study where they go through the property and figure out, well, you know what, the roof is going to last about 10 more years. So in 10 years, you got to have X amount. You're expecting X amount of CapEx, right? So you got to be prepared for that, and then you could do a cash flow analysis on that property. It's really cool in commercial because you do have a longer due diligence period than residential. So generally, a due diligence period might be, on a small multifamily, when I say small, less than 50, 60 units, your due diligence period might only be 30, 40 days, right? But if you have a massive complex where you're taking over $100 million complex, then your due diligence period, because you got to walk all those units, you got to walk all those buildings, might take 6 months. Or a massive commercial deal, right? Or if you're waiting for engineering and stuff like that, it could take longer. A lot of these land deals take 8, 9 months, right? Just to even get through entitlement. So those are some of the things you'll outline in there. Basically a time frame for your due diligence period, any closing date, and any contingencies or conditions as you would normally have in a real estate contract. So if a contingency is this, the seller has to find another property to do what's called a 1031 exchange. That's a deal we're working on right now, where the seller has to find another property to do what's called a 1031 exchange. That could be in the LOI, so then that way everyone is is understanding of what to be expected. So an LOI also offers flexibility. So it does outline key terms of the transaction. It's not necessarily binding, meaning that either party could kind of walk away from the deal without penalty. And until a formal purchase agreement is executed, there there is both parties kind of walk away without any damages in a sense. But with the LOI, sometimes it can be more serious. It just depends on what the parties are expecting, that kind of thing. But sometimes too in there's like confidentiality clauses, which then like that could be legally binding if you kind of break those things. And then, it's a negotiation tool, right? Like I said, it serves as a purpose to really help people, figure out, hey, is there even a deal here? Can we even transact? Can we even go through this and make a deal happen, right? In it, like I said, after the owner signs it, after the buyer signs it, you do what's called the due diligence period, and then they'll involve any properties, financial, like they'll go through the finances, like they'll ask, ton of questions to the seller, and the seller has to answer all those questions. And then we'll go through any legalities. Is there any pending lawsuits, that kind of thing. And I laughed because there was a property that a friend of mine had under contract, and the owners were like so set on him, like basically buying the LLC, buying the property in the LLC. Well, as he was doing his due diligence, he was basically calling, it was a dock, and he was calling every single owner on the dock, right? Like every slip rental on the dock. And he finally called a guy, and he was like, yeah, like we're suing the owners. And he was like, what? He's like, yeah, we have like $1 million lawsuit that's pending. And it made sense why the owners wanted him to buy the LLC. And if he hadn't done his due diligence, done his homework, and started calling every slip owner, then he would have not known, right? He would have bought this thing, and then before you know, he's got to go back to the investors and say, hey, by the way, guys, we just closed on this thing, but we're being sued for $1 million. Like, investors will be so upset with you, and they won't trust you. So that's why, when you're doing an LOI and you are doing your due diligence, make sure you give yourself enough time, and you do the thing that you are supposed to do. Do your due diligence. Don't just expect owners to just, to take their word for it, that kind of thing. Especially in commercial real estate, when there's businesses involved, they want you to buy an LLC, always have your antennas up, right? So the next thing too is, it's once the LOI is done and once you go through due diligence period, then you can kind of go ahead and issue a purchase agreement. And basically, like, that's both parties, like, using the LOI as sort of the framework. Then they will write it out into a purchase agreement, and everything in the LOI has been satisfied. They'll, will execute a formal purchase agreement. And again, like, the LOI is a foundation for the purchase agreement. So overall, LOI is a crucial role in commercial real estate when you're transacting because it establishes the initial framework for how the deal and how the process is going to go between the buyer and the seller. It also provides some clarity and structure. Believe it or not, in commercial real estate, sometimes the seller and the buyer will even talk to each other because it might be something that's not necessarily being communicated well over writing. So sometimes, like, they'll do phone calls, and that's okay as long as both parties are respectful of each other. It's a really cool thing. So anyways, I hope this video was helpful to you guys on figuring out what an LOI is. If there's something specific in an LOI that you would like me to cover, please let me know. Anyways, hit that subscribe button below, like, follow, comment. I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.